Good evening, my friends. So today I want to talk to you about something I've talked about a lot. I've written about it a lot. Haven't talked about it a lot lately. I thought we would get back to basics tonight and talk about Rune Shamanism. As you know, I have 3 books on runes: Rune Shamanism, Rune Divination, and Advanced Rune Shamanism. They're all very different books. And I think that they deal with the 3 different selves. So if you're not familiar with that understanding of shamanism, which you can find in multiple traditions, this is my belief and my experience, is that we are not one self. We are a community of selves. And those, among those selves, the 3 main parts are the 3 selves: the upper, the middle, and the lower self. We find this in multiple traditions. In the Hindu tradition, the Vedic tradition, you have Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu. In the Christian tradition, you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. That's interesting because there's nothing in the biblical literature that says anything about a Trinity. Nothing. That was imposed entirely long after Christianity became a major religion. And I believe it was done so because the European mindset is wired to think of a Trinity. So the Trinity did not originate with the Christian religion. You find it in Taoism: heaven, earth, and man, the 3 ones, which are the 3 main deities that control the universe, blah, blah, blah. You find it everywhere. There is this Trinity. Odin, Vili, and Ve in the Norse tradition, the Germanic tradition. And, of course, you have the 3 Norns. So you have this Trinity everywhere. And I guess I'm saying that's probably why I wrote 3 books. And each of those 3 books is very different. We're going to be talking about Rune Shamanism. Rune Shamanism, for me, is the first book that I wrote that helped me connect to what I believe to be the spirit of the runes. So I'm going to be talking about a lot of, sacred cows in academia and in modern paganism and heathenism about the runes. For me, the stuff I'm going to be talking about seems self-evident, but for a lot of people it may not be. I think a lot of people just take what's given to them. I think a lot of, even what's been written by the majority of the rune magicians and the rune scholars and the pagan authors and the heathen authors who write about the runes, and I won't name any names, you could probably come up with at least a couple of them. When I was getting into the ancient traditions of my ethnic ancestors, I of course read from the supposed experts. And from almost the very beginning, I could feel that there was a lot of guessing that was going on, a lot of trying to regurgitate what academia teaches about the runes and the origins of the runes, a lot of conjecture. If you don't know what the word conjecture is, it's basically taking a guess. And so we'll talk about that. And so after looking at that, again, I believe very strongly in critical thinking. So critical thinking asks a bunch of questions. When is something true? When is something false? When is something partially true and when is something partially false? When is something sometimes true and sometimes false? And of course, just looking and asking logical questions. My experience with, when I was reading about the runes and trying to study, I even tried to study with I won't mention it. It was some big thing. It's now sort of fallen apart, but some big rune, whatever. And I ended up getting kicked out of that because I was asking too many questions. And I was pointing out too many flaws. So they ended up Actually, I ended up leaving. I said, you guys don't know what you're doing. I do have experience with traditions that have, what's the word I'm looking for? Initiations into actual lineages and traditions. So I've had an experience with those lineages and traditions that have an unbroken connection into prehistory. So I know what that feels like, and I know how they deal with it. And these guys did not have that. They wanted to present themselves as a traditional lineage of the runic knowledge, but they just the way that they dealt with it, I could tell they really didn't have that experience. Now, everybody does their best, and I think they were doing their best, but without having that connection back into prehistory, you don't have the power of the ancestors that came before you. You're making it up as you go. Unless you're one of those lucky individuals that receives, some kind of divine supernatural revelation. Odin appears in front of you and touches you on the head and says, "Bah, take this, here you go." Other than that, you're left to guess. But as it so happens, that people have emotional agendas. And the biggest emotional agenda of all is to be accepted and to be loved. This is true for everybody. And if it's an unconscious agenda to be accepted and loved, it is going to color your interpretation of what's in front of you. So if you have an unconscious agenda to be seen under the light of academia as being historically accurate and true, then a lot of your assumptions are going to be based on that. Let me give you one of the biggest ones, which I think was the most fallacious assumption that I saw in that, and that was that the runes were arbitrary. That the power of the rune magician came from him loading his intent onto the symbol. That the symbol itself had no power. That the sound itself had no power. But that the rune magician had to load it. He had to focus very clearly on what it meant and to load on it. And so this scholar went on to say that, modern rune magicians should learn what the theory is, because then you'll know what you're supposed to load it with. Because otherwise you could confuse the runes if you don't have the right understanding. You'll load it with the wrong understanding. So if the runes do carry a vibe, it's from Rune shamanism. Things were stated as fact that there was no, there was no evidence behind it, nothing to back it up. And it's taught. There's some stuff that's taught out there. If you go looking for rune stuff, you'll find web pages of people just regurgitating what they've read in these rune, expert books. Which isn't to say I didn't learn a lot from them. I did, so don't get me wrong about that. So I'm going to be talking about what I believe to be the Ice Age origins of the runes. Now, I can't prove this. I'm not trying to prove it. I have no need to prove it. It doesn't matter to me whether it's true or not. Because I believe that what I have gleaned from this approach to looking at the runes, it has bore out in practice of the runes. And so even if it's just a mythology that I am sharing with you, because a lot of mythology is that way, mythology of, how the world was created. Literally was there this giant named Ymir whose feet had sex with each other and created, Obviously, it's not untrue. The more that you can accept that and really absorb that and digest it, you will understand on a deeper level what was happening underneath what physics will tell you how the universe came to be. So there's value in mythology. So if you want to, you can look at what I'm going to talk to you about the runes as being a form of mythology. I do believe that it came from the ancestors and from the gods, and I do believe that it's there to help us understand what the runes are. So, first thing, remember, everything is an assumption. Excuse me, I haven't been eating a lot, so I'm going to have a little protein drink here. Forgot what I was saying. So, rune shamanism, we're going to look at the runes. Yeah, I completely forgot where I was going with that. In any case, so, assumptions. We start with the assumption that the runes are not arbitrary, that the runes themselves are eternal, that the runes themselves have power inherent within them. If this weren't so, then we wouldn't have the mythology of Odin dying to himself and having the runes reveal themselves to him. If there are arbitrary creations of human beings, that myth would be absolutely worthless. Another reasoning that I have behind saying that the runes are not arbitrary, that they are eternal, that they are self-inherent with, in their own power, is that we see this understanding in the Vedic tradition. Why is the Vedic tradition so important to me? It just seems obvious to me. It seems obvious to me. The Vedic tradition is an Indo-European tradition. It's the oldest written Indo-European tradition. It is the oldest and the only surviving Indo-European tradition that has a completely unbroken connection all the way back to its origins, who knows how many thousands of years ago. It's the only one that still exists. And of course, there's all kinds of linguistic connections. I've revealed to you that the gods in the Vedic and in the Germanic are the same gods. There's different pronunciations, slight changes in the words and in the root seed sounds that go into the names of the gods, and that the Germanic tradition even sheds light on the Vedic tradition and vice versa. So it seems obvious to me. But, people, again, I would see people type in, I don't know why he talks about the Vedic. That's different. I mean, how can your mind be so little to not understand that the Germanic tribes didn't just sprout out of the ground sometime, 1,000, 2,000 years ago? Everything has an origin, and everything evolves from something before it. It's just the thinking, the lack of thinking. But unfortunately, I have to accept that there are a lot of humans who just don't really do a lot of thinking. They're just not deep thinkers. They don't analyze things. So I guess that's part of my job, is to tell you, here's my analysis of what I've looked at. Here's what I think is really going on. This is where things really come from, and hopefully that will be helpful to you. So from the Vedic tradition, there's a very clear understanding that the sounds that we speak, words are made up of little seed sounds strung together. And the seed sounds are just what they sound like. They are the seeds that create the universe. That the mantras that are chanted in the Vedic tradition are not things people made up. That a shaman went deep into trance and heard these sound vibrations already in the fabric of the universe. starting with the seed sounds themselves. The names of the gods are seed sounds, sometimes multiple seed sounds strung together. To understand who the god is, you have to understand the science of the seed sounds. This was revolutionary because I learned some of that before I even began looking into my ethnic tradition, and that understanding actually opened up to help me understand what the gods really were, which then helped me understand the Vedic tradition even better. And I believe this is what we're doing in this day and age, is that we're coming together, syncretizing the ancient knowledge, and the end result will be, you know, the sum of the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So it's very clear that these aksharas, which is the Vedic word for syllables, these aksharas have power in and of themselves. And I believe, in my experience, having worked with Vedic mantra, Vedic aksharas, and working with the runes, that there is a difference. And the difference is in the strata. It has been my experience that the Germanic traditions represent an older, base, shamanic, more primitive tradition, or an expression of an older tradition, that the Vedic was in the process of becoming more sophisticated, if you will. Their society was less primitive than their Germanic cousins. Now, let's get into how, first let me just dispel the whole Indo-European migration theory, because you may be listening to me thinking, oh, what is this, about 7,000 years ago they split off from each other? No. I followed the Paleolithic continuity paradigm. It's not a theory. Some people want to call it a theory. It's not a theory. It is a paradigm. If you want to look it up, Paleolithic continuity paradigm. If you want to look it up, feel free to look it up. Why is it a paradigm and not a theory? A theory is some guy or some gal who is in a specific scientific niche. They're a physicist or a linguist or whatever they are, an archaeologist, and they come up with a theory. Here's what they think happened. Here's my theory on this. A paradigm is when you have a simultaneous conclusion that is being reached by people of multiple disciplines simultaneously without any interaction. And so what this was is you had linguists, archaeologists, and geneticists who were starting to come to the conclusion that the old Indo-European migration theory did not stack up to the science. So if you don't know what the Indo-European migration theory is, the Indo-European migration theory is a very old theory that it predates by hundreds of years modern archaeology, linguistics, and genetics. And the theory was that there was a group of people that they dubbed as the Indo-Europeans, who swept through all of the Western Hemisphere in a matter of a couple of thousand years and brought with them their warrior horse culture and their religion, and that they dominated all of the people all over Europe and supplanted their religion, their culture, and their language, all within a couple thousand years. And the result of that came, and again, within, in some cases probably within hundreds of years, the different Indo-European languages, the Slavic, the Celtic, the Germanic, and the rest. So that was the theory, and that was the theory that was postulated by Europeans who went down into India and Iran and saw, oh, these guys' language is similar to ours. We must have come down there and given them their language, because Europeans thought they were superior to everybody else. So that theory and that mindset and that unconscious assumption, remember everything starts with an assumption. If you have a wrong assumption, you're going to have wrong conclusions. It starts with that assumption, and it just sort of bled over into modern times to this day. I mean, I go around on YouTube sometimes and I'll see pre-Indo-European, the pre-Indo-European Europeans. It was taught when I was in college, and it didn't make sense to me then. It sounded, that doesn't sound right. So these different disciplines of science were independently coming to this conclusion that the Indo-Europeans didn't somehow magically sprout out of the ground in the Russian steppes sometime 7,000 years ago and then just, do this really impossible thing that can't happen in any place else in the world. That actually these Indo-Europeans were there from the beginning. From the beginning of humans into Europe, you had this group of people that we look upon as Indo-Europeans, which means that they were speaking Indo-European, or the ancient form of it, when they crossed over into Europe from Africa. Now, the moderners, modern Westerners pull their hair out at this thought. They cannot accept this. Now, it's obvious to me looking at it, there's clearly a racial problem. They have an unconscious racial issue about it. But they have no problem saying that all the other languages, the Asiatic languages, for example, oh, that came from Paleolithic Africa. They have no problem with that. Europeans, their language came from Paleolithic Africa? They can't tolerate that. And you ask them why, and when they start trying to explain themselves, they get lost into, well, we don't really know what happened. They can't really explain it. So it makes for a much simple, a much more logical origin for the Indo-European people. Is that somewhere between 50 and 35,000 years ago, these groups of Indo-European speaking, the first modern humans who came into Europe were brought with them the basis for what became the Indo-European culture and religion and languages and all that. Now, as they started spreading out into different areas of the Northern Hemisphere, they became trapped in isolated pockets because they were trapped because there are these giant ice ages. It was in between ice ages, as the ices receded, they went across over into Europe, and then the ice came back, and they were stuck. The Celts were stuck on what is now the Spanish Peninsula, the Iberian Peninsula. And they actually went around by boat over into what is now the British Isles. That's why the British Isles for the Druids was the focal center. It wasn't Europe. Continental Europe was not the homeland of the Druids. If you wanted to go to like the headquarters of the Druids, you had to go onto Britain. That's because that was the first, one of the first big landing places for the Celtic people during, tens of thousands of years. They developed their language and their culture and their religion on the Iberian Peninsula and on whatever was, not covered in ice on the British Isles. The Germanic tribes were smashed down on the other side, north of the Pyrenees Mountains, in what is now southern France, and they were stuck there for tens of thousands of years, and they created their version of Indo-European language, culture, and religion, which is, I believe, where the runes and the practice of the runes was started. We're going to talk about that. Slavs were in their place, and You know, all the others, I don't have any knowledge of them, but I'm sure they had their own little pockets somewhere. And here's some evidence to back that up. Well, I don't know who it was. Don't remember again. I should probably write these things down. Reading something, you can probably look it up. It's probably still floating around the internet. I didn't learn it that long ago. It was just a couple of years ago. Geneticist wanted to find out what the genetic makeup of was of the earliest humans in Europe. And so he found, I guess, the oldest human skeleton from which, so far, they were able to extract DNA. And he sequenced that DNA and then took that DNA sequence and compared it to all other European DNA sequences. And what he found is the one culture and ethnicity group in Europe that most closely resembles the first modern human, I don't know, I think it was 30,000 years or something like that, how old this skeleton was. The culture that most closely resembled this earliest of humans was, drumroll, the Scandinavians, people of Scandinavian origins, which I find so ironic. The people who are most associated with white supremacy are in fact the most closely ethnically, genetically related to the first black Africans who came onto the European stage. If you want to see the closest thing to an African in Europe, go look at some Norse guy. Well, why does he look so different? Well, because he spent 50,000 years in Ice Age conditions. He lost all of his pigment. So if you can get over just the incredibly infantile, childish focus on skin color and hair color and eye color, then you can see that, you know, people are people. So it makes me laugh every time I think about that. So what does that mean? That means that the runes themselves could be as old as that individual. The runes themselves, the practice of the runes, the discovery of the runes may go back 35, 50,000 years. This, you can look on my channel. There's a really old video on my channel called, I think, Ancient Connections. And you can find out about how old this symbol is, which is why I wear it. I wish, again, I had written this down, but I had, and I don't know what I did with it, but I had a book that I had found online, which was an esoteric, like, what was supposed to be a folk magic, you know, not sigils, what's the word, not sigils, but anyway, sigil magic. We don't use that word in the Vedic tradition, but Vedics, these were like, you know, really, really old, and they had a bunch of symbols and what the symbols meant and how to use them in magic. And there was one that looks just like this. And it's called the Ashtanga Yantra. You can look it up if you want. The Ashtanga Yantra. It means 8-limbed yantra. And it is used, if I remember, it was used for the same purpose as this Eyjolfur symbol is, which was destruction of negativity, all of that kind of stuff. But there were other, what we would call runes, bind runes, in there that were identical to runes that are found in the Galdisbrok, I think it's called, which is the last surviving, maybe the only written book of Icelandic rune magic. And there are all kinds of different runes and symbols and things like that, and they were the same. Now there's only two ways, I suppose 3 ways. There's 2 most logical ways that can happen. It means that some Icelandic guy traveled down to India and learned from some Indian yogi these ancient sacred symbols and brought it back to Iceland. Or some yogi traveled up to Iceland and learned Icelandic rune magic and brought it back to India. Both of those sound very unlikely to me. Or that, I guess there's four options. The third one is that they just both sort of pulled it out of thin air at the same time in different places. Or what I believe to be true is that those are both very old, ancient, orally passed down traditions that go back tens of thousands of years to the first Indo-Europeans. May have brought it with them from Africa, for all we know. So I'm giving you this background to give you a different understanding of the runes. So let's talk about, if you go into academia, if you go into Wikipedia, if you go online and you want to find out what are the origins of the runes, they will tell you factually, as if it is a historic fact, they will tell you that the runes are the alphabet for the Germanic tribes, the first alphabet of the Germanic tribes, and they will tell you factually, like this is a fact. They won't even address it at whether or not it's a fact. They will say, and they got this from existing Mediterranean alphabets. And then they'll go so far as to say, as though it's a fact, they will say, this was brought back to the Germanic tribal lands from Germanic warriors, mercenaries who were fighting down in the Mediterranean. Now, this is then, you can find this in books, you can find this in heathenism, Asatru books, as well as just regular academia and history books, and it will be out there as though this is a plain fact. They give no references to any of this. They don't say, oh, the historian so-and-so says, or this, or we found this, which they don't have any of that. They just state it as a fact with no references. And this is then regurgitated even by these modern heathen rune magician experts. But I'm here to tell you that that is pure conjecture. Conjecture means it's a guess. It's just a guess. Now, it's a logical one. I don't have a problem with the logic of it. It sounds logical. But once you accept that as a fact, it becomes an assumption. Once you have that assumption in there, then every conclusion that you make on top of that will be based on that assumption. That is why you have modern rune magicians who believe that the runes are arbitrary symbols that you load your intention on, and that's where their power comes from. Because they have the assumption that it was first an alphabet that was brought back to the Germanic tribes from mercenaries who were trying to copy the alphabets of the more civilized Mediterraneans. If you reject that assumption, then you have to ask yourself where it came from. I'm saying that the rune syllables themselves, not necessarily the symbols, but the rune syllables themselves, the sounds, I believe are perhaps tens of thousands of years old. I believe that the alphabet was a method of magical training for ancient Ice Age Germanic people. That was an oral tradition that most likely was shared from father to son. Reason for that, we still now see, going forward, I say now, but relatively speaking, 2,000 years ago, which is relatively very soon in comparison to all those other tens of thousands of years. 2,000 years ago, we have Tacitus, who tells us almost completely proves. We just don't know what the symbols were. But he lays it out very clearly that the head of the household, the father of the household, was the priest of the household. Now there were priests outside of the household, but that the head male of the household was also seen as a priest. And that these Germanic tribespeople would carve off little pieces, squares of bark off of trees, and I can't remember what trees. I think he even mentions what kinds of trees, but I don't know that it matters. And that they would then take those little staves, those little pieces of square pieces of bark, and they would carve symbols on them. That's all he says, that they carved symbols on them. He doesn't say what the symbols were, but that these symbols were used for divination, that the father, the head of the household, would spread them out over a white cloth, I believe. I believe it was a white cloth. And, he'd do whatever he did, and he'd just put the runes out, like tossing the bones, and then he would raise them up to the sky 3 times, and then he would divine what the meaning of it was. Now, Tacitus does not say they're runes, but I think it's pretty clear that they are runes. I think that's pretty clear. Now, let's attack the assumption that the runes are just alphabets that are copies of the Mediterranean alphabet. We have one problem. Well, we have multiple problems, but we have probably the biggest problem, is that there is no other alphabet on the planet that has the same order as the Futhark. There is no other alphabet that goes F sound, U sound, TH sound, A sound, R sound, K sound. There's no other alphabet in the world, to my knowledge, that follows that progression of sounds and syllables. So the Germanic peoples, still to this day, are very practical people. If it works, don't fix it, is a very Germanic thought process. They have no problem, as you can see, they have no problem assimilating other cultures, technologies, beliefs, if it works for them. They have no problem with it. So if what they were trying to do was copy the Mediterranean alphabet, they would have simply copied the Mediterranean alphabet, which goes A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. In Greek, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, it's the same thing. Might be a few little variations, but it still starts with A, B. It's the same. That's why the Latin alphabet we have now, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That was in use for hundreds of years, in slight variations, but it was the same. Now, if they're down there, as the academicians want us to believe, and that these Germanic warriors are down there, and they're picking up this alphabet, they would have just simply taken that alphabet and brought it back with them. It's not that hard to do. So why did they have this Futhark? It doesn't make any sense. It comes out of nowhere. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for it. Another thing that occurs to me is that the Germanic tribes were not a unified culture like the Romans. Even in the Roman Empire, you had a bunch of different cultures smashed together, but they had a unified language, official language, a unified official alphabet. They had a unified this, that, and the other thing. But the Germanic tribes weren't like that. And even before the Roman Empire, you had a bunch of different alphabets. You had a bunch of different alphabets floating around the Mediterranean that were very similar, but there was a lot of differences. So even then, all those people who were a more unified type of a culture, they still had, these varying alphabets. So if, again, the theory is that there are these, I don't even know how true that would be. Why would a Germanic warrior before Roman times travel all the way down to the Mediterranean and sell themselves as a, I mean, they're more likely to get enslaved. It just doesn't make sense. But you have this unified alphabet among all of the Germanic tribes, what we now call the Elder Futhark. And there was a unity of language among the Germanic tribes that we don't see even, like 1,000 years ago. There was a mutually intelligible Germanic language that was shared among all of the Germanic tribes. And they used this same alphabet, but they were not a unified nation. They were not a unified culture. They warred among each other. There was constant wars and skirmishes and battles amongst the different tribes, which means that they would, if they were just trying to bring in an alphabet, there would be different alphabets. There isn't. There's only this Futhark, this Elder Futhark, which tells me that there is an existing order of how to classify the sounds. So the point I'm trying to make is that there was a system of the sounds go like this. You're teaching your son the principles of speech. You're teaching your son the sacred syllables, and they go in this order. Fehu, Uruj, Thurisaj, Ansuz, Raido, Kenaj, and then you give him the understanding. Fehu means cow, and this is blah, blah, blah. This is why Fehu means money. Uruz is power. Uruz is the oryx, is the buffalo. I don't know what they call it. The bison, the wild bison of Northern Europe. And so a young man would be taking this all in, and this, if it were just an alphabet, you wouldn't see that uniformity among it. And then it wouldn't have turned into a magical practice. So the assumption, remember everything starts with an assumption. The assumption of the academicians is that, well, they're these illiterate barbarian warriors who go down and they pick up an alphabet and they don't really know what they're doing, so they sort of put it together in their own format. And then because they're so superstitious, because they're these primitive, superstitious, barbarian people, illiterate people, they ascribe all of this magical power to the alphabet. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. Doesn't it sound ridiculous to you? It sounds like what somebody says when they're talking about somebody they're looking down on, which reflects the modern self-hatred we have towards our ancient ancestors. Let me give you an example on that one. When I was growing up and going to school and you went to learn European history, what they called Western civilization, the first thing you learned was first the Near East. Nothing wrong with learning about the history of the Near East. And then you learned about the Greeks. And then after the Greeks, you learned about the Romans. And then after the Romans, suddenly Northern Europeans sprouted out of nowhere. And then we start learning about Northern Europeans. But there was never a class about ancient Germanic culture. There was never a class about ancient Celtic culture. Because we don't know what it was. The reason why we don't know what it was is because we adopted, our ancestors adopted the mindset of our captors, of our conquerors. If you want to understand, this is the funny thing about nation building. The idea that we as the United States can go into the Middle East, conquer some Middle East country, and just sort of paste on, modern Western democracy, and then it'll take off and they'll become a democracy. And we wonder, why the hell isn't this working? It's just a completely different culture. They don't think like we do. They have their own way of doing things. And it's okay for them to have their own way of doing things. Democracy doesn't have to work for them. But that's what we ended up doing is the same thing, is that the Romans came in and they looked at us and they tried to do nation building with us. And they pasted on their Roman way of life, which is why the Frankish tribes, who were Germanic-speaking, pagan, polytheist tribespeople, why they adopted Christianity and started speaking what we call French now, which is basically just bastardized Latin. We have a whole continent of people who have thrown away their ancient culture, and they have adopted the culture, the religion, and the language of their captors. You know, it's interesting, you find that this is where you find the greatest concentration of alcoholism and drug addiction in cultures whose culture and religion was taken away from them. That's why there's that, you know, this stereotype of the drunken Indian. Well, there's some truth to that, is because when you take away their language, first of all, you take away their freedom, you take away their normal land, you take away their culture, and then you forbid their religion to them. There's, you know, you basically just, you know, they've got this emptiness within them. And this is where alcoholism and drug addiction can take hold. Why, you know, you talk about the Irish. The Irish are alcoholics. Well, you know, Irish have been dealing with that kind of thing for a long time. We don't realize it, but the Germanic peoples have gone through that as well. But the Germanic peoples, among all of the Europeans, from what I saw, were the best at adopting the culture of their captors. And if you notice, like here, even in the United States, I'm going to try and say this without saying something that will sound offensive. You find a lot of people, well, let's just say minorities. There's a whole system. There's a whole like undercurrent culture of minorities who still hold on to victim mentalities, and they overcompensate. This is what the Germanic people did. The Germanic people, they overcompensated so heavily because they bought into at least 400 years of the Romans enslaving them, belittling them, destroying their culture, that they overcompensated to such a degree that they became more rapacious than any Roman legion that ever came through. It's a way of self-protection. It's the, what do you call that? Not the Helsinki syndrome. What is that syndrome? You know what I'm talking about, where you identify so intensely with your captors that you want to be like them. This is what the Germanic people did. That's why when you go to school and you learn about European history starts in the Middle East, and then Greece, and then Rome, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, the Europeans, the actual Northern Europeans appear. It's a self-hatred. So this is a roundabout way of saying that practicing the runes as meditating on the runes in a shamanic way is a way for us to connect to our prehistoric Ice Age ancestors, to understand how they thought. So again, the first thing you have to believe is that the runes are not arbitrary, that they are self-empowered, that they represent like an underlayer of sounds that are continuously vibrating in the universe. When you chant those sounds, you are chanting those like seed principles, energetic principles within the universe that actually keep the universe, you know, functioning. That's why if you chant Fehu, it will either bring you resources or bring up your issues associated with resources. This is why I don't have any runes on me. I don't have any runes tattooed anywhere. And I don't recommend it. Maybe you're different than me. I don't think I'd be able to get away with it. I chant the runes, and my whole universe starts coming apart at the seams. They're too powerful for me. I have too much respect for them to just chant them like that. That's me. But that has given me, and I have no problem chanting mantras all day, because mantras are seed sounds that are thrown together in a very specific way to achieve a very specific thing based on your astrology. So it's, it's a little more safe. Runes, to me, are too concentrated, which is why I think they represent an even more primitive understanding of the sound vibrations that make up the universe that the Vedics then built upon in their way, in a more sophisticated way. So, anyway, I had planned on going through a bunch of other stuff, but that's not what's going to happen today. So, the book is called, let's see, where are we? The book is called Rune Shamanism. You can find it at Michael, whoops, that's not how my name is spelled, michaelwilliamdenny.com. So it looks to me like there might be some new people on the channel, so let me get this out of the way. I don't want your opinions. This is not a free-for-all discussion, the Q&A. It's a Q&A. If you have a question for me, write the word question, and then put your question after it, I'll answer. I am going to not, I may even delete some comments if I think it's distracting. This is not a discussion, between your opinion versus mine. I'm going to take a break and come back, and if there are questions, I'll be happy to take them on any subject that I deal with. But feel free to focus on the runes, and we'll take it from there. So, be back in just a couple minutes. All right, welcome back. Okay, so I want to give a plug for this. By the way, there's also Rune Shamanism video series on my channel. It was originally a DVD. It's a 3 hours, 3 different videos, an hour long, I believe. 3 hours, which I go over in detail of the Rune Shamanism, which is supposed to be used in conjunction with the book, Rune Shamanism. So you can go on and watch that as well. You can also, if you want to learn kind of rune divination that I do a very specific kind of 9-world rune divination. You can learn, not only have access to all of the rune videos that I've ever made, paid for or free, in one spot. You can go to runecertification.thunderwizard.com. Don't tell me how to spell things. I know what I'm doing. runecertification.thunderwizard.com. And you can have at your fingertips everything I've ever said about runes and how to do rune divination. Okay, so there you go. All right, so let's take a look at the questions. I'll be going back. I've been talking for quite a while, so we'll go back and see here. So, Bill C. question, could you tie in the Naga agenda with the Norse mythology? I don't know what you're asking me, Bill. The Naga agenda, the Naga conspiracy is another project I'm working on, and that is more of a modern myth. So, yes, of course I can tie it in there, but I have my own specific agenda for that. I'm not drawing from the Norse tradition to create that. Okay, so yes, of course they can go together. Any true mythology from any tradition, you will be able to put them together and see where they connect. They're not directly connected. Bill C. question, you remembered a past life of being the bodyguard of a shaman. Not just a shaman. I remember being the bodyguard of a tribe of Neanderthals. Out of curiosity, what was the other one that you said you remembered? I remembered 3, and I've shared them. One was, the second one was a middle-aged, early middle age, not middle-aged, but in the early Middle Ages, a Catholic priest who went against the system and was tortured and killed. And then I remember being a French elitist, whatever, oligarch, assassin who died a horrible death, diseased death. So those are 2 others. I talk about those in detail in my other videos. Thank you for asking. Emerson's Coffee Bite question. In one of your books, you talk about the wealth cow. What is the connection with Fehu and Uruz to the sacred cow? Well, the wealth cow is Audumla. So Audumla, see if I'm even writing this correctly. Let's just do it this way. Audumla. That is the mythical wealth cow, which is also, you see in the Vedic tradition as well. There's a wealth cow there. And it just, the cow this is a good thing. So, according to Tacitus, the Germanic tribespeople did not have money. And not only did they not have money, they didn't care about money. If you came to them with a pile of gold, they looked at you like, what am I supposed to do with that? If you gave them a handful of gold, or to choose between a handful of gold and a handful of silver, they would pick the silver because the silver was shinier. If you gave them a silver goblet with a bunch of precious stones in it, they would look at it and go, that's nice, and they'd stick it on their mantelpiece, and then they'd keep using their wooden mug. They just didn't care about that. They were still, practical people. They still lived in connection with nature. So the cow, the reason why the cow even exists is because in prehistoric times, which is why I believe we have the Uruz rune, and it is my belief that the Uruz rune was originally the first rune in the series. and that Fehu was added later. I'm glad that it was, because then it created you know, an even number of 24, which can be broken up into threes and all that. But I believe in Ice Age times, Uruj was the first rune, because there was this this bison that we now call the oryx, which was something like 7 feet high at the shoulder and had huge, crazy huge horns, and was incredibly fierce, so fierce that, you know, you couldn't tame it and all that kind of stuff. But Ice Age hunters would hunt them, and this was a preferred prey for them, because if you could bag an oryx, you had bones which you could make into weapons. You had horns which you could make into weapons. You had sinew which you could use for sewing. You had meat, of course, which you could eat. You had, you know, milk. You know, once you, I don't know how they would have gotten milk. It took them a while. You know, but human beings are not naturally able to drink cow milk. That was something that came later. And Europeans are among those who have that more than many other cultures, and it's because they domesticated the cow. But, you know, when you bagged an oryx, you had everything. You had food, you had clothing, you had bones. I mean, you could make a shelter out of it, you could make a coat out of it, you could make tools out of it, you could eat, you could, you know, just everything. So it was like the Walmart for prehistoric people. So that's why Fehu, because Fehu is just nothing other than a domesticated oryx. The cows you see now that are very domesticated, you know, their wildness has been bred out of them, but they used to be just the bison of Europe, the wild bison, the buffalo of Europe. And so that's why Fehu, cow, represents resources. And our ancestors didn't have money that you had to pay with the cow, which is why today when you charge money, you charge a fee, which is just the modern pronunciation of the word Fehu, which means cow. How can we maximize what true prosperity with these and others? Well, true prosperity isn't, you know, if you just, I'm going to say something that's going to sound blasphemous, but if you just chant Fehu all day, it's not going to make you rich. Unless you are connected to your soul desire. If you are not connected to your soul desire and your life is not coming from your ore log, then you're wasting your time, because you are taking actions that are against your ore log, and the universe will not give you resources. Money is just an energetic resource. You know, you could, if you are connected to your ore log, you could chant Fehu and not get any money whatsoever and still end up having a fancy house and a fancy car and a bunch of food. Because Fehu just means resources. And the universe is going to give you resources in the quickest way possible. You know, there's been times in my life where I've, you know, I remember once I worked, I didn't work, but I served as the manager of an apartment building, and in exchange for that, I got like almost no rent. I got to live in a really nice apartment for almost nothing. And all I did was just take people's rent money and, you know, if I had to, you know, call the plumber or something like that. So that is how Fehu can work for you. Because again, our ancestors saw resources as practical, because money is just an arbitrary symbol of value that has no value unless you and I both agree it does. And then if we do, then you use that symbol to get the stuff that you need, which used to come from the cow. So that's why our tribal ancestors were just interested in having cows. Here's a cow. Go build me a house. How much did that house cost you? Oh gosh, that cost me 4 cows. Oh my gosh, 4 cows for that house? Well, yeah, of course. It's got you know, it's got a pen for the geese and Right there on the river. Okay, so let's keep going here. Kingslayer 44 question: would you elaborate on loading runes with intent? No, I'm trying to tell you that's a waste of time. I'm saying that those who claim that the runes get their power from you loading your intent on it, you are working against the runes. The runes are not arbitrary symbols. They're not arbitrary sounds. They exist already in the universe. Odin, when he sacrificed himself to himself, when he died to himself, the runes were revealed to him. They were already there in existence. So you don't need to load it. This is where modern Western magic fails big time. It starts from an old Christian concept. The idea that the universe is arbitrary. In fact, atheism itself comes from Christianity. Christianity is what said, oh yeah, the earth is evil and there's nothing and there's only God, and God decides who's going to live and who's going to die, and you're going to go to hell anyway. And atheism says, oh, nothing exists, which is really just a further reaction to monotheism. You can't stand the thought of being controlled by Jehovah. You can't conceive of any other potential beings exist because you really are a monotheist at heart. You don't like that, so you pretend not to believe in Jehovah, which then you manifest as you claiming to be an atheist. But this idea that, that everything is arbitrary is a waste of time. Trying to force your will on the universe is a waste of time. Because the way the universe functions is, if you are connected to your orlog, which is your internal soul desire that you programmed into your own body before you were born, then the universe will give you absolutely everything to help you achieve that. Now, if you're trying to achieve something that's not your orlog, the universe goes, I don't know how to help you with that. That's not what you said you wanted to do, so I'm not going to give you anything. So that's, if you try and load the runes with your intent, you are starting from the assumption that the universe doesn't provide for you, that your own internal orlog doesn't have magical power within itself, and you are desperately trying to find some way to create something because you don't believe you deserve it. Chaos magic starts from that assumption, which is why, it's a waste of time. I mean, I'm not going to say it doesn't work. It's just, is the difference between doing like chaos magic and operating from your true soul desire is the difference between flying in a supersonic jet and trying to, race on the back of a mule. I mean, it's just, they both work, but one takes a hell of a lot longer than the other one. And so you continue to ask, can we make ourselves more efficient in loading the rune with intent? So again, you weren't listening to what I was saying. If you go back to what I was saying, I'm trying to tell you that whole idea of loading anything with your intent is a waste of time. It's very inefficient magic. Rathgar Redbeard. All right, so Rathgar Redbeard, I think you're new to the channel. I'm only interested in your questions. You're welcome to be here, but this isn't a free-for-all. Here's my opinion on this. Here's my opinion on that. No, this is my show, and I'm here to answer questions, and that's how it works. All right, so I'm going to bypass anything that's not a question. Is the whole point. All right, so Stockholm Syndrome. Thank you. Yes, that's what I was trying to say earlier. Robin Pruitt, question. So you think it would be disrespectful to tattoo runes on your body? I'm not saying it would be disrespectful, because if you don't know any better and your intent is pure, that's not disrespectful. I'm saying that for me, my experience of the runes is that they are so powerful. I'm saying to you that when I use the runes, when I interact with them, the power that I experience and the change that happens in my life is so intense, it's not something I do lightly. So I am not going to tattoo things on me until I'm absolutely 100% clear that I can handle it. maybe what I'm saying is that for some people, the runes, give you 100% of their power, whereas other people, the runes are like, we'll just give them what they can handle. I don't have that experience. The runes are just way too intense for me. In the past, when I have done teachings on runes, if you go onto the Patreon channel or if you go to runecertification.thunderwizard.com, every single time I talked about a rune, I had the full impact of that rune on my life, and it just, in some cases, just tore me to pieces. So for me, it wouldn't be disrespectful. It would just be foolish for me to tattoo runes on my body. And when people tattoo runes on their body with a lack of understanding, like when the racists tattoo the Othal rune on their body, thinking that they're saying, yeah, my people, my race, they have no idea that they are asking the universe to slap some serious sense into them. It may not happen in this lifetime. Maybe it'll happen in the next one. It's another reason I don't play around with, I like to believe that if I don't completely understand something, I will say, I don't completely understand that, I'm not going to mess with it. That's just me, though. You can do whatever you want. I won't say you're disrespectful. Emerson's Coffee Bike threw down $5. Thank you. She has a question. How does the latest Patreon video relate to rune study? I don't know. The one that I talked about, past lives and forgiveness, I don't know that it does. I have connected with the Algiz rune to rid me of victim mentality and codependency. So Algiz, El-Khaj, which means elk, is that rune that looks like 3 fingers going up like that, and you can see them in all of the limbs here of the 8-limbed Eoshiomer. You see the El-Khaj rune. The El-Khaj rune, I believe, goes all the way back to prehistoric times, to perhaps Ice Age times. The Ice Age deer in Europe was enormous and had huge antlers. I think the antlers were like 10 feet across. So, when those guys fought with each other, it was a big deal. And when, if a giant cave lion or a cave bear was, trying to attack a herd of giant, Ice Age deer, they had to go up against 10 feet of, really sharp, intense horns. That's why, by the way, I think that we still to this day make chandeliers out of deer antler, because I think originally there was power in that. So first it was a weapon, so it's for protection. The 3-limbed has the shaman with his arms raised to the heavens, and the energy of the heavens and of the earth is coming up and spreading out from him, and he protects the whole tribe with his shamanic power. So El-Khaj rune is a perfect rune for getting rid of victim mentality, because it connects you to life force energy and shamanic energy and power. So that's not necessarily rune study, but that is one rune that will help you overcome victim mentality. Thurisaj is another one that will help overcome victim mentality really well. Passing Artura's question. And I know this random, but do you think the earth might be hollow and full of Nazis? What do you think I think? I think you're just trying to push my button so that I'll go off. I obviously think that's ridiculous. I won't even go further. Oh, there's more. Question, addendum. By Nazis, I mean Nordic Atlanteans. How did you get that? How did you get Nazis and Nordic Atlanteans mixed up? Nordic Atlanteans? Anyway, Atlantis is not some fabled thing that, there was a race of, I'm sorry, there was not an advanced race of people on Atlantis, and it didn't sink in the middle of the ocean. Atlantis is nothing more than the Isle of Santorini, which used to be a giant volcano. There was we know from history, there was a society on that island, and the island blew up and sank in the ocean. It didn't sink; it's still there. The rim of that is the Santorini Islands. There's just a big giant volcano. That's Atlantis. Forget all that New Age nonsense. Yeah, I've already told you, the hollow earth theory is nonsense. Come on, you guys, please. I said I wasn't going to get upset. Just, come on. You don't need to do that. Seven Serpents, question. Were the Neanderthals culturally advanced? It depends on what you mean by culturally advanced. They did have a culture. They did have a religion. We know that. They had language because we know that we go all the way back into at least 1 million years ago that the pre-hominid bipedal hominids had a bone in the throat that only humans have, which enables speech. Chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans don't have it, which is why they can't speak. So that means even these really ancient pre-humans that we think are just chimpanzees, they had some kind of speech. And so the Neanderthals also had speech. So yes, they had some kind of culture. I don't know what you mean by advanced. I think that's up for personal interpretation. Isis Blackfeather, question. My sister-in-law just passed. Sorry to hear that. She did not pass peacefully as she should have, and could have had her doctor and nurses been compassionate, and could have had her doctors and nurses been compassionate and her dying continued. Is there a special way in the Norse tradition to honor her? There's the same way as any tradition. There's a reason why 40 days is there. So think about her. Some traditions will have feasting for 40 days. They'll have mourning for 40 days. So her soul is going to spend at least 40 days traveling around to you and to the rest of her relatives, trying to connect with them, accepting the idea that she has passed, and trying to, the soul tries to connect and tell everybody, hey, I'm okay. And of course, we can't see or hear them unless we get a dream or, like in my case, when my partner passed, stuff was flying off the walls because she was trying to tell me she was still alive and trying to get my attention. So other than that, you spend those 40 days honoring her, thinking about her. You can do things like light candles and talk to her. You can chant for her, do prayers, do mantras, chant for her, and send her power. Because, she is okay. Because everybody has Valkyries, we call them guardian angels, we all have them. And no matter how they died, there is going to be somebody there to say, hey, let me help you with this transition if they're having a difficult time. More than likely, even when people die and it's not peaceful, the soul knows what's going on. The human being may not have, but the soul does. So just give her peace, forgive her, talk to her, try and work out any unfinished business you have with her. And doing things like lighting incense. The reason why we offer food and incense to spirits is because spirits can't eat with their mouth, but they eat through smell. So if you ever offer food, like to a past loved one, throw that food away. Because that spirit will have gone down and will be smelling and will take the energy from that food and leave in its place, death. So never eat something that you give to a human that's just passed. So this is again why things like incense is good, because the spirits want to smell good things. That's how they eat. And so this is a way to make her happy and feel better and talk to her, tell her that it's okay, that she's gone, that we'll be okay without you, we love you, move on to your next, wherever it is you're supposed to go, that kind of stuff. That's what you can do for 40 days. Isis Blackfeather, okay, you already asked that. Isis Blackfeather, can you use a rune in the same way you can use a sigil? A rune is a sigil, so of course. Yep. Michael Emery, question. Do you mind sharing with us how you defined your true soul desire? The same way that I teach you how to define your true soul desire. I asked myself, what is it that I want? And then I bumped into what I thought I was supposed to do, what other people wanted me to do, and I said, fuck that. What is it that I want to do? I want to surf. I want to live in Southern California on the beach, and I want to surf. Ask yourself the same question. To find out exactly, you can read the book, The Shamanic. I talk about it in this book too. Commandment to a Perfect Life. You can find it at michaelwilliamdenny.com. Crazy, beautiful question. Would you please elaborate regarding the elves communicating with the dwarves for manifesting? That is talked about in depth in my books. This is a huge subject that would take hours to really explain, but you know, the easiest thing to do, the easiest thing for everything to come together, everything, is what I just talked about. Read that book. If you do that, everything else will fix itself, and the elves and the dwarves will communicate. The elves communicate with your higher self. Your higher self gives information to your lower self. Your lower self is where your dwarves exist. Your dwarves are the emotional energy sources that have their own consciousness, but they represent your subconscious and your unconscious, all kinds of stuff. When you are in alignment with your Orlog, you automatically connect your lower self to your higher self. The dwarves have direct connection to the elves. Dwarves are beings that are evolutionary one step away from becoming human. So their next evolution will be to be a human soul. The ultimate evolution of the human soul is to become an elf. So we sit in the middle, and we want our lower self to communicate with the ascended masters. So I talk about that in a lot of other videos and books and stuff like that. So if you want, you can go watch those. Lord Memnach the Devil. Well, that sounds pretty ominous. Question. What is the first step one should take towards shamanism? Go onto my channel. Okay, so once again, if you want to watch, if you want to learn what I teach, you've got to put some time and effort into watching my videos for free. There's so many free stuff on my channel. You have to know how to search within somebody's YouTube channel, not search within YouTube. I've had people contact me going, where are the videos on the meditation? And I'm like, well, search within my channel. They don't know how to do that. So depending on whatever device you're on, you're going to have to find out the difference between searching YouTube and searching within somebody's channel. Go onto my channel and watch the videos on the free shamanism certification. That's the name of it. I think there's 3 different ones. The next one is to go to thunderwizard.com and sign up at the $25 subscription level. You will have access to all of the private videos where I go in-depth teaching shamanism and runes and energy work and ritual and magic from the very beginning, a step-by-step process. Go and watch from the beginnings, from the videos from beginning to end. I will teach you. Thank you for your question. Passing Arctura's question, I'm aware of an extinction cycle connected to cyclical ice ages on the planet. I'm not aware of an extinction cycle connected to cyclical ice ages on the planet, but maybe you're talking about like millions of years. So anyway, in any case, you're aware of an extinction cycle connected to cyclical ice ages on the planet. There is some evidence, according to whom, we don't know, evidence, meaning you found it on the web, or it actually came from a scientist or some conspiracy theorist. I don't know. I haven't followed your long, paragraph-long question yet to find out. By the way, I make fun of it because whenever somebody writes me a big long paragraph with a question in it, they're trying to get me into their intellectualized setup. That's why I tear it apart like this, because I don't necessarily want to swallow your assumptions, because I don't know if they're true or not. There is some evidence that some megalithic structures had been erected before the end or beginning of the last ice age. I haven't seen that. I don't know if that's true or not. I've seen some things. Anyway, I guess I've seen some of that. All right, but let's see where you're going with this. In your anthropological opinion, well, I'm not an anthropologist, so, nor am I an archaeologist. But in your opinion, is there any evidence for past high culture of humanity with more advanced knowledge of reality than our current incarnation as a race? Yes and no. I'm responding cynically to your question because it tends to line up with a lot of, what I think is a bunch of nonsensical New Age stuff. But there is some truth to what you're saying that I have found. And for instance, of course there's stuff you found, where there's stuff that's under the ocean that would have been erected, above ground before the end of the last ice age. So that is evidence of something. According to the Yuga understanding, the Vedic Yugas, the cycles of ages, we just came out of the darkest period, which was Kali Yuga, which happened during the entire Christian era. The Christian era, from beginning to end, which technically ended right around the Renaissance period. Because then the Renaissance period, what started happening? People started learning science, medicine, and started worshiping the gods of our ancestors in a very indirect way. They started bringing that it was chic to have Greek gods and goddesses in statue form, and looking at the form of the human body, all that kind of stuff. That was technically the end of Kali Yuga. Now, that doesn't mean that we immediately, came out of that dark period. Just like when a season ends, you still have a lot of holdover from the previous season. So right now we are finishing the tail end of the effects of Kali Yuga, which is manifesting in this absolute, complete divide politically, where there's no more middle ground. There's no such thing as moderates anymore. And there's no such thing as even balanced information. You're either getting information from one of two sources, and they don't communicate. And if you get information from one source, you will be completely clueless as to the information that the other source is giving, and vice versa. And that's the last gasp of Kali Yuga. And so, talking again about the migration of the human race into the northern hemisphere, I absolutely believe that Egypt was like a way station. That as people were coming up through, because what had happened is that there was I believe there was a climate shift where it must have gotten cooler, actually, now that I think about it. Cooler and wetter, where the Sahara Desert became a savanna grassland, and human beings were following the herds of animals, and they made it up into Egypt and what is now Egypt. But the Egyptian pyramids, there is evidence that those existed, long before, like 10,000 years ago or more. And there's evidence of all kinds of weathering and stuff like that, which says that they're really old. And I do believe that the pyramids were a last gasp, that people in previous times, before they got to Kali Yuga, had been more spiritually advanced. Technologically, probably also, but I don't think that their technology was the same as ours. I don't think they needed to have the infrastructure of, like electricity and all the kind of stuff that we did. Their technology was more energy-based and spiritually based. And I do believe that the pyramids, especially the big pyramid, was intended to be a giant antenna to protect the world from, they saw Kali Yuga coming. And that was used to sort of protect human beings and keep them from becoming, stupid and unspiritual. But obviously, that's grasping at straws. And I do believe that Egypt was a place where, as human beings were coming up and moving into other parts of the world, they stopped there for education and for all kinds of things. One of the reasons I say that is because, as you know, I studied with the Yoruba people. My two drum teachers were Yoruba drum masters, and they say that their people, now they're from West Africa, in Nigeria and Guinea and I don't know where else. They're among the largest culture in Africa. The vast majority of slaves that were brought to the New World were Yoruba people. So this is why, the Cubans worship Santeria, which is just Ifa. Voodoo is just Ifa, which is the religion of the Yoruba people. And I've talked about this and other things, that there are some words that they share, like the word for ancestor in the Yoruba language is awo, not two. I didn't say two. Don't spell for me. I know how to spell. Oh, did you just do it again? Awo. Stop doing that. The word for ancestor in the Indo-European language, can you guess what the word for ancestor is? Awo. What the Yoruba people say is that as they were coming up, that they originally came from the east, that they traveled from the east to where they are now. They said they originally came from Egypt. Now, obviously, the Yoruba language is not the same as the ancient Egyptian language, so that doesn't mean they were Egyptians. It means that they came from Egypt. They migrated. I believe that at one point there, we were all one tribe of people at one, and as we're moving all over the world, one of the places you went before you went to wherever you go, you go to Egypt, where the pyramids were. When they got there, they turned left and went to West Africa, and our ancestors kept on going north and became the Indo-European peoples. So I do think that there's evidence for that, and I do think that there was a stronger connection. I mean, I have a big thing I can say about the ancient caves in Europe, going back 35,000 years. I could go on and on about that, but short answer is yes, I do think there's some evidence for that. But I think I'll just stop right there. Amy Meyer, question. Let's get back to where did you go? Amy Meyer, question. What can I recommend to a friend who feels her power was stolen from her? That she come onto my channel and watch all of my videos. That's a huge question. I would need to talk to her. That's somebody probably needs some counseling and then some, and get a reading from me so she can get a mantra based on her chart. You can't just somebody who feels like their power is being stolen. There's some major issue going on. Maybe her power is being stolen, but it starts from a very deeply fractured psyche and a very deeply held victim mentality. She needs help. You can't walk up to her and say, do this and it'll all be okay. She needs a lot of help. So if you want, you can send her to career.thunderwizard.com. I will be happy to talk to her, and I'll probably be able to help her. Or at least give her some guidance as to where to go. But without knowing what is really going on, I can't answer that question. Lord Menach, the devil, question. Does the spirits like music? Do spirits like music? Yeah. Yes, they do. Passing Arcturus, question. Oh, continue. I already answered that. Rathgar Redbeard. Put question in front of it so I know it's a question. Otherwise, I normally bypass that. I saw that it was a question, so I'll answer it. Do that for me so that I can... here's the problem. When people are just constantly typing their opinion and doing whatever, I have to bypass them. I miss people's questions. And so I don't want to miss the questions. That's what I'm here to do. So right question, I won't miss it. Have you ever read the book The Secret of the She-Bear by Mary Cat Shea with a foreword by Vard Verkinus? Just wondering. I haven't. So can't comment on it because I haven't read it. I also tend not to talk about other authors and other teachers. Just because. Lots of times, anyway, but I'd prefer that you just ask me about what I teach and what I'm talking about. Crazy Beautiful question. Are the dwarves childlike? No. Crazy Beautiful. Spend more time watching my videos and reading my books. They're not, your question sounds like, I can't jump into your head, I don't know, but it sounds like you're asking me, are they like little children? Is that why they're small? No. They're not childlike in that way. No. So I could say yes on a couple of different ways, but for the most part, no. The question sounds to me like you're not really familiar with what I teach about dwarves. So learn more about what I teach about dwarves, and that will probably answer that question. Rathgar Redbeard, again, right question, so I know you're asking me a question. Is your book, Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, still available on Amazon? I believe it is. Go to michaelwilliamdemi.com. That's not how my name is spelled. michaelwilliamdemi.com. I believe it is. If it's not, somebody let me know. I just read something today in Yahoo that there are authors on Amazon. We're talking about guys who sell like hundreds of thousands of books, who have, who make their living off of Amazon, who have been denied, just outright been banned by Amazon for apparently no reason. So I don't sell books nearly to that degree, so I don't think I'm in any trouble. But if you can't find one of my books, please let me know so I can fix that. Passing all right, no more questions. Let's take a break. I'll come back. I'll maybe talk a little bit more about runes and or answer questions. We'll just see how everybody feels. All right, so let me now talk a little bit about, very quickly, some cool stuff about the runes. What am I looking for? I am looking for this. There it is. So I talked a lot about why I think the runes are much more ancient than what you learn in college classes or even in many books written by modern pagans and heathens and modern rune magicians. I think they're operating from a faulty assumption. I want to talk to you about what I think, how I believe the runes were used perhaps 20,000 years ago. The runes are set up in threes, 3/8. And I believe that if you follow the runes in order, you will see that it is teaching. Imagine an Ice Age hunter, a young man being initiated as an Ice Age hunter. It teaches him and gives him power that he needs in order to function in what would have been ancient, prehistoric, Paleolithic society in an Ice Age world. As I said before, I believe that the Fehu rune was added later. The reason for that is because my assumption, and even if my assumption is wrong, what I'm saying makes for a great myth. Again, myths don't have to be literally true to be true. This can still be the gods teaching you and empowering you, even if what they're saying isn't true. So even if what I'm saying isn't historically accurate, it very well could have been. And I believe it can transport us to what the runes can do. So as I said, Fehu, I believe, it was added later because Fehu and Uruj are the same being. The Fehu is the cow. The cow is the descendant of the oryx. There was a point in time when the Germanic tribes people were running around Ice Age Europe, and there was no such thing as a Fehu. There was no such thing as a cow. There was only these wild oryx running around. So if you're an Ice Age hunter, and you're teaching your son the most important thing, the first thing you're going to want him to have is physical strength, because once you get past modern society, even if you go back 100, 200 years, you have this problem with infant mortality. That infants die young, and even children die young. So what you needed first and foremost was physical power and physical strength. You also needed bravery, because they're living in a time where there are cave lions, cave bears, and oryx, and even deer with 10-foot antlers. There's all kinds of really nasty critters out there that could eat you alive. As well as it was very cold, and life was not easy. It took a lot of strength. It's interesting. I live here in Southern California. I'm of average height. I'm 5'9". I'm really not that tall. For my height, I'm big. So if you just look at me and didn't know how tall I was, you'd think I was huge. But I'm not that tall. So, my girth and my, all of that is great. But, and I feel pretty powerful when I'm walking down the street until I find some guy who's like 7 foot tall, and then I don't feel so powerful. When I lived in Idaho, especially northern Idaho, you wouldn't think so, but the average person in northern Idaho is huge. Not just because they eat a lot, but they're tall. They're like 6'6". The average guy out there is like 6'6". They're just these enormous people. And they strike me as what Europeans probably were like, left to themselves. And I run into people who have said that their ancestry is of, Norse, and they talk about, they're tall and their family's tall. So that was probably what was most important to them, was just physical strength and power. So the first thing you're going to want to give your young hunter, child as he's going through puberty is uruj. That's the first thing he's going to need, is power. Second thing he's going to need is to be able to defend himself. And there you have thurisaj, which gives you your boundaries, and it protects you from evil and negativity. Then you're going to need to communicate. You're going to need to learn how to communicate to your fellow hunters and to your tribe. You have ansuj. Then you're going to need to know the right path. You're going to need to know how to function in society, how things work, the pecking order, the chain of command, and what your job is, what you're supposed to do. Because everything is about the survival of the tribe. If you don't work together, everybody dies. You cannot live alone in Ice Age times and survive. It won't happen. You are almost guaranteed to die if you are not in a clan. Then you need kenaj, which is knowledge. Kenaj is, the word can that we have in modern English. Where am I? Where's my thing here? The word kenaj. Can. It does mean knowledge, but I think little kids, and you can find ancient Germanic phrases and words in how we talk to little kids and how little kids talk. That'll show you what the English language and the Germanic language really was a long time ago. Little kids come up to you and they say, "Mom, can I have a cookie?" They ask his friend, "Hey, can you drive? Hey, can you jump that wall?" It means knowledge, ability, and what's the word I want to use? Not permission, but authority. Do you have the authority? Do you have a driver's license? Can you drive a car? Yes, I can. I have a driver's license. Can you drive a car? Yes, I know how to get behind the wheel and make the car go. Can you drive a car? Do you have permission to drive a car? When a little kid says can, he means all three of those things. So that's the next thing that happens in the life of the warrior as he's learning, is he's given kenaj, knowledge, ability, and authority. And then we get to Gebel. Now, as he's growing older, he's now becoming, he knows how to, he's strong, he can take care of himself, he can communicate, he can follow the rules, he's starting to learn kenaj, and now he needs to learn how to give back, Gebel. And the result of that is joy. Wunjo, in my experience, does not mean happiness, like that makes me happy. It means the joy that comes from camaraderie. We call Christmas time a time of joy. Why? Because you are with family and friends, and the warmth and the joy that comes from that. So that's the first level, which is the lower self. When you follow this path in this way, his lower self gets aligned. Somebody asked about the connection of the elves to the dwarves. This happens automatically in Ice Age times when the warrior is taught that first level, his lower self becomes empowered. And then he is initiated into the tribe. He is now a hunter. He can be relied upon. He still has a ways to go yet, but he can be relied upon. On the physical level, he is empowered. First 8 is about empowering yourself on the physical level. The second 8, now he starts to learn. He goes to Hagal, the hailstone. Hailstone represents all kinds of rain, hail, snow. Without the hail, there is no streams, there is nothing to nourish the land, there is nothing to cleanse and heal. You have to have water coming from the heavens to cleanse and heal. This is Ice Age times, so you have hail and snow as much as just regular rain, so that's, I think, why Hagal is used. Hagalach. You know, it's so funny, these rune pronunciations. I remember when I was teaching this a while back, somebody came, this was one of my students, we're really frustrated. Student wants to learn from me, but then reads all these books from other people and comes back and starts going, I want you to teach me about the Hargol rune. I'm like, what's that? Hargol. Hargol? I'm like, what is Hargol? You know, and then I said, you mean Haya? Haga. He goes, yeah, I read so-and-so, and they said it was pronounced this way. It was some British person who, you know, their British accent was so thick that Hoggle became Hoggle, which when you hear it, it sounds like an R is not being pronounced. And so somebody else then took that and wrote Hargol. Very frustrating what some people could do. Sorry, I have, that was something that's been bugging me for like 10 years now. Hoggle. Hoggle represents, now this person is beginning to get some psychological awareness, because the second 8 is about psychological empowerment and awareness, and Hoggle represents the ability to self-initiate self-cleansing, to analyze yourself and to correct your own mistakes and to learn. Self-cleansing, to sit down and go, what can I improve about myself? How can I improve about my life? This takes a level of maturity, of psychological maturity. This is one of the most important things for critical thinking, to be able to ask yourself, okay, is this accurate the way I'm looking at things? Do I have any emotional agendas that are prohibiting me from seeing this accurately? This is Hoggle, self-examination. Then he gets to Nauthij, which is what? This clearly shows me that we're talking about Ice Age and prehistoric, because need fire is what the rune is. Need fire. And it's got 2 sticks, and it looks exactly like what you would use if you were to use that thing where, you know, the sticks to create a fire. It looks just like that. It's exactly how it looks. And so what is that? Whoever it was that invented or discovered fire really just was absolutely determined to go beyond their limitations. And so he gets to this point, and he has to be like that first guy who learned how to create fire from 2 sticks and a string. And he has to go beyond. He has to learn to innovate beyond what he can understand. This is absolutely important, because if he's being led to be a warrior, perhaps a chief of his tribe, he's going to have to deal with problems and figure out, okay, we've got an impasse here. How do we fix this? How do we get past this? He's got to be able to think creatively. And then once he does, just like the guy who first invented fire, he can revolutionize the whole world. We get to Isa, which is the self. He must be completely self-sufficient. He must not need other people's approval. He must not need other people's advice. There are going to be times when he's going to has to be self-sufficient within himself. He's probably going to be sent off into the wilderness by himself. And if he dies out there, he dies. But he has to be able to go out and sit out, which is what the Norse called sitting out, which is the same as having a vision quest in the Native American tradition. By the way, an interesting thing, that same, those same people, as I talked about, the guy who found the 35,000-year-old European bone, and from that deduced that the people in Scandinavia are the closest genetically to the first humans that arrived in Europe. What was I saying? I forgot what I was saying. It felt really important. I totally forgot. Anyway, you got to be self-sufficient in and of yourself. The next one is Yera. If you look at Yera, what does it look like? It looks like a gear. Gear is spelled like this. The G sound was not always used by Anglo-Saxons. That came from the Vikings brought the hard G sound, but the Anglo-Saxons didn't. So they would have pronounced gear as year. And what does a gear do? Things come together. This is relationship, cooperation. He has to learn, after he learns to be self-sufficient, he then must learn how to cooperate. He has to be cooperative. And then he gets to the very middle of his initiation in the runes, and right smack dab in the middle is Yuhwaj. I pronounce it Yuhwaj because it comes from the yew tree, and the sound is U. We don't have that sound, and so when people write E-I, Ehwaj, what's the difference between Ehwaj and Ehwaj? I don't think it was pronounced Ehwaj, I think it was pronounced Yuhwaj. The yew tree. He has to die to himself. He's smack dab in the middle of his psychological transformation, and here he must die to himself. And there was probably a ritual where he, had to die to himself. From that dying to himself, he finds out what his orlog is. We get to Perthro. He finds out what his own personal path in life is. That comes from the gods. When he understands what his true life path is, he receives power, Elhaj, which empowers him, and that power can be used to protect the village, to protect his clan. Then he is now ready for his spiritual journey, and he receives the power of soul. Soul. Soul is the word soul. We spell it S-O-U-L. And the reason why we spell it that way is because it used to be S-A-W-U-L. Saul. He now has the power of his soul. Something I want to say about that, I'm not going to. So I don't want to divert myself. Every time I go off on one of these tangents, I start to forget what I was saying. Then he goes to the final 8, which is what will make him a spiritually empowered man. And here he goes to Tiwaj. Tiwaj, Tiu, the Sky Father. That is what the name Tiu means. It means sky. Tiwaj Father. He was the original king of the gods. Before Odin, there was Tiwaj, who was the king of the gods. Dieus Pita in the Vedic. See, you have the Tiu. Tieus. You have Jupiter. Tiu Peter, Sky Father. Tiu. Chinese also have the ancient emperor who lives in the North Star, who guides his people. His name was Di. Ti. Same guy. So it represents the highest awareness. Tiwaj is seen as a warrior, but he's not. He's a protector. He protects through highest awareness. People want to use this as victory, and they want to use it in a violent way to get victory over some people they don't like, and they throw around the Tiu rune victory. They have no idea what the hell they're talking about. It's the victory over your lower self. It is Tew that fights, that puts his hand into the mouth of the wolf Fenris, who represents your base instincts that will devour you. And he is continuously fighting. Yes, we see him walking around without a right hand. But his hand is still alive. He still feels that he's a god, not a human. And there's a sword going through the mouth of Fenris, and he's wrapped with the magical rope of subtlety. But he will break free. It is Tew that is continuously in battle with that, and it is the highest awareness. It is your higher awareness that keeps Fenris bound up. That's why he's a warrior, not because he goes and conquers people. He's not a Mars god. He's a Jupiter god. He's the god of the planet Jupiter. So the warrior, the hunter now has, maybe he learns to meditate. Maybe he learns a deep spiritual practice which will open up his higher centers. This creates spiritual birth. We get to Berchtana, which comes from the word bright. If you ever, when I lived in northern Idaho, I would go out and I would gather birch bark because it was really excellent fire starter. And when you light birch bark, it pops and it crackles, and it's multicolored. It's the colors of the rainbow. It's amazing. Very sacred, very healing. Brooms were made from birch bark. That's why witches ride brooms. Not because they're practicing evil magic, but because they cleanse. And so that the reason why you used birch bark brooms was not only because they worked, but because this is what the mothers and the grandmothers would do. They would be not just cleaning the dust and the dirt, they would be cleansing the whole house of negativity. And they must have had a lot of knowledge about that. Like secret magical knowledge about how to protect. That's why they were so feared. And that's where the stories of witches flying on broomsticks. It's the fear of what the feminine can do when it has power to cleanse and to heal. It's very frightening to those who have evil intent. Ehwaj, the horse rune. Now the warrior, the hunter, now has the ability to channel the power of the gods. Like the horse, who intuits the rider, and I've been on horses that were so well trained that all you had to do, you could take your hands off the reins and fold your hands and sit on the horse, and you could just simply think about where you wanted to go, and the horse would go exactly where you wanted. Now he has this ability. He's now getting the power to channel the power of the gods, to talk and to communicate, and to let the gods guide him. He trusts the universe. His intuition is fully awakened within him. This gives him the power of manaj, which is the power of meditation, power to see things objectively from the true mind. Manaj means mind, as well as human being. And that's what makes the human being the man, is that they have a mind. No other animal has that. The divine mind. Man. This gives him access to his true emotional depth, the laguj within him. Deep, deep instinctual, deep, powerful emotional power that comes up from the depths of the earth. The depths within him, now he can channel his emotions in a way that connects him and gives him passion and creativity. gives him divinity, as opposed to being irrationally thrown around by his instincts, which he thinks are his emotions. His true emotions come from his moon, which is why in astrology, the moon is representative of the emotions. For this reason. This makes him a priest of the sacred fire, the Ing. The Ing rune is the rune of the sacred fire of the hearth. We talked about this numerous times. This is why we put the pictures of our ancestors on our inglenook, on our fireplace. There is still like one of the earliest not castles, but royal residences, I forget what it's called, in England. It's a museum now. And I wish I could remember the name of it. But you can go there and tour it, and there's one of the fireplaces there, one of those big fireplaces. And on the mantelpiece is a bunch of Ing runes. Now this is in Christian times, but they still used the Ing rune. They probably didn't even know why. It was just something you did. When you built a fireplace and you built a mantle, you carved Ing runes on it. You can see it. See the Ing runes across there, because Ing is the god of the sacred fires. Frey is not Ing. Frey is Ingunar. He is the Lord, the Nar of Ing. He is the master of the internal fires, which is why he's always in meditation. Master of Kundalini. So now he has this power to become a priest of the home, within his home, the priest of his own fireplace, his own inglenook, within his own home. Now he can experience true bliss. We get to Dayaj, the full expansion of the power of the spirit, which is like the Sawal, the sun in the midday shining upon him. And he can have Dayaj, Dagaj, power of complete expression of the soul. He can have enlightenment, which is nothing more than being in the present moment, fully aware from the power of his soul, which is the power of bliss and enlightenment and awareness. And this will make him now part of the tribe. This will give him his inheritance, his othah, his inheritance that he has earned from all of the knowledge given to him by the runes. People who put the othah rune and think that they own something because they believe that they have some ethnic heritage that gives them the right to wear that, they have no idea that that rune is earned, and anybody can earn it. Doesn't matter where you're from, what color your skin is. If you follow these runes in that order and you pass the test of each one of those runes, you are given your own othah, your own inheritance, which is your own connection to the tribe of who? Of Man. There's only one tribe. There's the tribe of Man. These runes are sacred knowledge that was given to our ancestors. And our responsibility is to bring this knowledge to the rest of the world, that the rest of the world can use it. This is the time when all of the four races are going to come together according to the Hopi myth. And we screwed up. Those of us of European descent screwed up big time. You want to get upset about that? You say you're proud of your heritage and what I just said pissed you off? You're a pussy. Because if you're a real man, you own up to your mistakes. We made huge mistakes. Our job was to bring this knowledge of the runes to the rest of the world. Just like the rest of the world has been bringing their knowledge to us. The East Indians have brought their knowledge. They are part of us. They're part of the fire tribe. But they brought their knowledge. The Chinese have brought their knowledge, which is the knowledge of atom, of life force energy. Native Americans have brought their awareness, which is the power of earth, ritual to Mother Earth. The Africans have brought their understanding of water, which is rhythm, because they know how to connect. They're bringing that knowledge of their sacred tradition. Our job was to bring the power of fire. The runes are fire, which is why I don't mess with them. Because when who knows what's going to happen? I've gone through all of them. Who knows what's going to happen to me now? But if I spend like a week talking about one rune, that fire goes into my whole life. And I have to go through that. So that's why I don't mess with these things. So this is my understanding of how I believe the runes were taught to Ice Age Indo-European people who we call the Proto-Germanic people. And I believe that this is how it works. Nowadays, as I said, Fehu, I think, was added. I think it was the last rune that was added, and it was put at the beginning because once we became, we stopped being hunter-gatherers and we became farmers, then we needed Fehu, which was the same as Uruj, but first you need stuff. You need money. You need resources. You need a home, and you need skins, and you need milk, and you need cheese, and then you need strength, and then you need everything else. Okay, so there's my take on that. What do you think of that, huh? All right, I'll see if there's any questions. We're probably done. We've been on for 2 hours. Duchess, Nancy Ann, drop down. First it says $1.99, and then it says $15. I don't know what that means, but thank you, regardless of what it is. She says greetings. Thank you. Rathgar Redbeard, again, please write question before you ask a question. Otherwise, I will miss your question. Do you think Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred with one another? Yes, we know that for a fact that they did, because everybody north of Africa has within them anywhere between 2 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Some people say that the Neanderthals didn't die off, they were just absorbed. And so, yeah. Yep. And we know that Neanderthals had the genes for light skin, light eyes, and light hair, and red hair. So it is very likely, Europeans are the ones that you see light eyes, light skin, and red hair. You don't really see that anywhere else, which probably means that, when we were interbreeding and we absorbed the Neanderthals, that, we selectively, not consciously, but, the adaptation, the force of evolution, took those things because that's what Europeans needed. They needed to be able to, handle being out of the sun. I mean, like if you've ever been anywhere really far north, like Iceland or someplace like that, you know that in the middle of winter, man, there's just no sun. You can be almost impossible to get vitamin D3 if you live there all the time. That's what it was like for our ancestors during the Ice Age. And do you think we Caucasians, Europeans, are all part of Neanderthal genetically? No, I don't think we are part of Neanderthals. I think Neanderthals, and this has nothing to do with just Europeans. It's the same for everybody. Same for anybody north of Africa. So everybody north of Africa, whether they be from Asia or wherever else, so get out of the idea of white people. I mean, it sounds like I'm contradicting myself. But, you find 2 to 4% Neanderthal in everybody. Even if somebody in the South Pacific, you're going to find 2 to 4% Neanderthal. So we're not part of them. They're a small part of us. We absorb them into our culture, into our species. So that gets rid of the idea that there was this warfare between humans and Neanderthals. I don't think there was a warfare. I think there was mutual understanding, and they were starting to die off anyway because they were too developed for Ice Age conditions. They've been in Europe for we've been in Europe for 35,000 years, 50,000 years. They were in Europe for something like 250,000 years, long before we ever got there. All right, let's see, more questions. Nathan Johnson, question. Could you speak specifically to those of us that are leaving Christianity as you have and embracing this path? What would the gods say to us at this time? Well, for that, there's a book. It's called Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward. I can tell you exactly what Odin said to me about it, but it's more than just that. I go into detail about what the Christian religion is, where it came from, and when you look at how it was put together and what it really is, then it loses all of its power, because you see how it was just pasted together and slapped together, and it was used. It has no connection to traditional spirituality of any kind. So that's the best answer to your question. You can also go on my channel and look at the playlist of Odin Says Jesus Was a Coward, and you can learn some of that there. This isn't a question, but I have to address it because, okay, so Violet, when you want to ask a question, you write question, so I know it's a question. I've heard from multiple sources that you can interchange alges and ehwaj, and I think you mean yuhwaj. Is this true? First off, let me just tell you, you don't mean anything by it. But one of the worst things you can ever do in China is when you are training with a sifu, you never say to the sifu, so-and-so says such and such, what do you think? It is understood that that is a sign of disrespect. So I know you meant no disrespect, but now that I am a teacher, I totally get why they do that. Because it puts me in the position of saying that other people are wrong and I'm right. It puts me in the position of bad-mouthing them. So you say, you just ask the question, and then I can answer the question for you. But since you asked it, I will answer it. What's the point of interchanging runes? If our ancestors honestly believed you could interchange those runes, they would only have one rune. They were very practical people. Remember, if you take my assumption that this is an Ice Age survival, like this is how you needed this to survive, then you wouldn't have any more than you needed because you already had enough to deal with. So this to me is incredibly intellectualized. To operate from that assumption, it says that the runes are arbitrary, and they're not. So I find that to be the assumption behind it, I think, is completely erroneous. Of course not. You just heard me go through both of them, and you heard the difference. Of course I don't believe that. But thank you for the question. Robin Pruitt, question. Can you please continue speaking about the soul? Not tonight. We've talked about it a lot. I talk about it lots of times. But thank you for the question. I'm running out of steam for tonight. Robin Pruitt, question. Have you heard of the Cro-Magnon man? Of course I have. Of course I have. What are my thoughts? My thoughts are that was a species of modern human. I don't know what else to tell you. I don't have anything magical to say about them. They're just an earlier form of modern humans. Robin Pruitt, no, sorry. Nope, that's it. No more questions. All right, guys. I think I said plenty for one night. This was fun for me. I hope you liked it. If you want to learn runes, you can. If you want a rune reading from me, you can go to runereadings.thunderwizard.com. If you want a rune reading, a Vedic astrological reading, and a North Star shamanic reading, go to transformation.thunderwizard.com. If you want to learn my style of rune divination, which uses the 9 worlds in this layout, for me, that has been so far the most potent reading that gives you a snapshot of the individual from all of the 9 aspects of the human being, from the 9 worlds. If you want to learn that, you can go to runecertification.thunderwizard.com. Okay, so I think that's everything from me. Wait, there's some more questions piling up here. Robert Pruitt. Question, have you found in your research of the runes that the Romans tried to destroy the runes? No. Nope. No, that our ancestors did that all on their own. They wanted to be part of the Catholic religion, and the Catholic religion used the Roman everything. You know, the French are the perfect example. They were, you know, total Germanic warriors, and they ended up being more Roman than the Romans. And really full of themselves and really full about how Roman they were. No, they did it all on their own. All right, that's it. That is it for me, my friends. I will see you on the next time. Till then, enjoy the power of the runes. I don't have anything else to say. I'm trying to think of something clever, and I can't think of anything, so that's it. Let me get rid of this, and then we'll play me out. Talk to you guys soon.